Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Venugopal, and on behalf of the patrons and the board of directors of Chennai International Center, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's program. As you know, we've had 18 events so far over the past year. Indeed, we complete 1 year this month, and what a year this has been, not just for us at Chennai International Center, and I dare say for the country and the economy as well. We've had many tumultuous events on the economic front. The demonetization in November, the crackdown on black money, and the introduction of GST this month. From the government's perspective, these are all reforms for the good. From another perspective, these were highly disruptive for the economy. Even those who strongly said these were for the good are saying, like Kumaramangalam Birla said the other day, don't do anything more for another 6 months. Enough is enough. So how did the decision makers perceive these reforms before embarking on this course? What were the consequences they expected, and how did they prepare the nation for them? Were there nasty shocks? And if so, how did they cope? More importantly, how is this all going to pan out in the future? We are privileged to have with us this evening one person in government who had a hand in implementing these telling and substantive reforms. The former Secretary Economic Affairs, Mr. Shaktikanta Das. I welcome you, sir. Mr. Das, many of you will know, hails from Odisha, but he is someone Chennai can call its own, and I'm sure Mr. Das will acknowledge that he calls Chennai his own. Mrs. Das is here, and she had her daughter learn Bharatanatyam, so she is culturally, they have the roots here. Mr. Das was the virtual face of government on television and in the media in general, when it had to answer all the questions about demonetization and the drive against black money. He is here not just to tell us how the government did what it did, but also to offer some sketches of the roadmap ahead for the economy. Talking to him this evening will be Aarati Krishnan, a journalist of very high caliber. Welcome, Aarati. She headed the research bureau of the Business Line newspaper and is a keen student of both the corporate world and of the larger economy. Let me leave the proceedings now in her capable hands.
As a columnist and an op-ed writer mostly on markets and the economy, I often end up asking a lot of questions and raising issues for policymakers, never hoping to get any answers for them actually. So it's nice to have somebody from the government and one person who's had such an illustrious career. Most of us know him because he was in the hot seat during demonetization, but a look at his profile actually told me that he's been at the center stage for many of the controversial and difficult tangled decisions of the government. whether it was pursuing the Swiss banks to disclose the black money accounts, or whether it was untangling retrospective taxation. There were many policies, or getting states on board on GST. I think he's been involved in many of these tricky decisions of the government. So it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you, right? So what I'll be doing is I'll just make a few observations on the economy and on the issues that I think we would really benefit from Mr. Das's views, and then after that he can basically take up the baton and start answering those questions. On the economy, actually, lately good news and bad news seem to be intertwined. So if you look at the CSO's latest provisional estimates of GDP, we see that the numbers are quite bad. And somehow people are happy about that, because then they are not skeptical about the numbers. Because when the numbers are good, often there's a lot of questioning of the numbers and skepticism about whether there is window dressing and so on and so forth. So what the latest release tells us is that the economy did slow very significantly in the fourth quarter of FY17. That is probably a delayed impact of demonetization. If you actually break down the numbers, you see that important segments of the private sector, such as manufacturing and services, saw a very material slowdown in the fourth quarter. And actually what saved the overall numbers and kept it at 7% was huge government spending, which went up by 20% or so, and the rebound in agriculture. So as I see it, it's very hard for the government to keep, for the economy to keep functioning on this one engine, which is government spending. So is this really a sustainable kind of a driver for the economy? That is one issue. The second thing is the agriculture rebound, which again, given that it is so dependent on the monsoon, after so many decades of liberalization and progress, isn't it a sad commentary that we are still so dependent on the monsoon to decide such a key segment of the GDP? So that is one thought I would like to flag. So if you can enlighten us about the outlook for the economy and what it means in terms of government spending or other factors picking up from here, that would be useful. Private investments has been a very big cause for worry, and there's been a very significant slowdown. In fact, starting right before demonetization, from then until now, we've seen a steady deceleration in that proportion, private investments. And in the latest quarter, the number was 2.4% or so, which is really low. So that is the first part. How would GST affect this whole economic situation? Because today we are hearing a lot about the temporary disruptions and the transitory factors due to GST. People are talking of destocking, fire sales and things like that. So is that just a very temporary effect, or will it have a lasting effect, especially on the informal sector and so on and so forth? You hear a lot about the importance of job creation in the Indian economy. In fact, you see some numbers being thrown around saying 10 to 12 million people are joining the workforce every year in India, whereas the jobs being created is, say, 2 to 3 million. I don't know how correct these numbers are, because recently Niti Aayog has questioned these numbers and said that these are probably based on just surveys and not comprehensive employment data. So given that big job creating segments of the Indian economy like IT, pharma, some of the export oriented sectors, they've been slowing down. What is Mr. Das's view on this whole story of jobless growth or growth with jobs? I mean, what is the game plan? And is the government seized of this issue? And what is the thought process or thinking about solving this problem? That is the second thing. Then, of course, there's demonetization, which I'm sure everybody is very curious about. Ever since the exercise was concluded, we've had very little authentic data flow from the government. We've had news reports speculating on the amount of bank deposits that came in. The number was put at anywhere between 10 lakh crore and 15 lakh crore. And then some of the statements were refuted also. So, and we had an interesting statement from the finance minister in the budget, who said that, who disclosed some interesting numbers. He said that during demonetization, over 1.09 crore new bank accounts received high value deposits, over 2 lakh rupees. So, is the investigation into those deposits actually complete? And Is the IT department actually on the job in using big data or analytics to track down these evaders? What is the kind of progress that we have on that front? That would be useful. The other criticism we all heard during demonetization was that not enough is being done to bring that offshore black money component back. I know you're an expert on this, Mr. Das, because you worked on this disclosure by HSBC of these offshore accounts in Swiss banks. So if you could tell us, do you have rough estimates of how much money is there and whether, what is impeding progress on that front? That would really be helpful. I think I've put rather a lot on his plate, but just a last thing. I've observed that this government is very keen on interacting directly with citizens. So on Twitter, you find all these ministers, say the railway minister, commerce minister, interacting directly with people and addressing queries also from citizens. So that is one way of disintermediating the bureaucracy, I feel. They're just skipping that one stage and going directly to citizens. There is also this portal that they opened called mygov.in, where you can log in, register, and actually directly give your inputs to the government on key policy issues. For example, during the budget, I saw over 4,000 comments had come in for the finance minister to consider. And today I checked that portal and over 44 lakh people have registered on that and are interacting directly with the government. Apart from that, we are also seeing in the tax side, GSTN, for example, is completely electronic and it removes the interface between the taxpayer and the administration. So you're just skipping that and directly you're filing your returns online and interfacing with these people. So does this actually pose a threat to the bureaucracy itself? What does it mean for services? Will it mean overstaffing? Will it mean a part of the services will be obsolete because of this disintermediation? So that is the fourth thing. So would really like to have your views on all these things and on anything else that you would like to speak about.
Good evening, everybody, and a very distinguished gathering here. I think a lot of brain and people whom I respect in Chennai, they are here. Some of my mentors are here. Some of the people whom we looked up to during our career in the civil service and particularly in the finance ministry when I was there for continuously about 8 years. Some of the people we looked up to, Dr. Rangarajan is here, Mr. Murari is here. So a lot of eminent people are here, and a very good evening to all of you, sirs. And extremely privileged to be here and to talk to the Chennai International Center. In fact, for over a year, Venugopal and Gopal Subramaniam have been Gopal, they have been sort of inviting me to participate in this event, but somehow due to the pressure of other work I could not. But now that I have relinquished office, so I found time, and the moment they mentioned it to me, I was very happy to participate. I also do recognize the presence of a lot of captains of industry here with whom I have worked as Industry Secretary of Tamil Nadu. So when I am participating in an event like this, it's truly a kind of homecoming and coming back to meet it's like coming back home and meeting your friends and neighbors. So almost all the faces are so very familiar. But thank you once again, and thank you, Aarati, for that introduction and all that queries. Thank you, Venu, for the introduction. Now, what I will do is that, there are today two kinds of perceptions about the Indian economy. There is one group which feels that everything is all right and the economy is doing well, things are very robust. There is another group which is very skeptical. Now, broadly, these are the two segments of thought. And but I would like to point out and I would like to place for your consideration certain facts which are, known to you. It's not that I am coming and saying something which are not known, which are obvious, which are known, but to place things in the perspective, I must highlight some of these points. The first point I would like to say, basically what I will do is that I will talk about two broad areas before I go into and during that also I will address some of the questions. First, I will talk about the overall macroeconomic parameters, how the government looks at it, and how we look the future roadmap, how we look at it to play out. The second aspect I would talk about is the kind of reforms and policy initiatives that government has been taking, and what is the sort of perhaps the possible roadmap ahead. And then I will talk about some of the key challenges that the Indian economy faces today. The first point I would like to mention about the macroeconomic parameters is that our macroeconomic parameters are today, given the current prevailing world situation, are quite robust. Now, there are very few countries which have recorded 7% plus growth. As you know, post 2008 financial crisis, India was able to sustain growth by considerable amount of government spending that sustained the growth for about a couple of years, but then the associated problem of excessive borrowing leading to inflation and other problems that affected the economy. So therefore the government had to sort of pull back and bring the fiscal policy back to the road of fiscal prudence and maintaining the fiscal deficits and the fiscal targets. I'm happy to point out that in the last in the last three and a half, 4 years, the fiscal targets are back on the rails. And I was fortunate to be associated with almost as many as 8 budgets from 2008 onwards, and have been in the finance ministry, so I have seen it from very close quarters. In the last 4 budgets particularly, I would say that the fiscal the emphasis on the fiscal prudence, on the FRBM targets were very, very important, and today therefore the GDP growth is where we are today. The fiscal deficit, consistently we have maintained our targets. Last year it was 3.5, we maintained 3.5. Year before that it was 3.9, we maintained that, and this year's target is 3.2, and I'm quite sure the government will maintain that fiscal deficit target. Now, one thing that has changed today in the Indian policy making is that the fiscal deficits of the government are achieved not by cutting any expenditure. There was a kind of a trend which had developed over a period of time that you make a budget, then during the course of the year, if the revenues don't materialize, you tend to cut expenditure so that you balance your revenue with the expenditures. But I can say that over the last 2-3 years, expenditures have not been reduced. In fact, during the course of the year, the expenditures have been increased over what was provided in the budget. We were lucky in the sense that the petroleum prices, the oil prices remained quite stable. But I think one also sees a kind of a structural change which is taking place with regard to the global crude, the oil production. Today, gone are the days, I may be wrong, because this is such a volatile world, I may be proved wrong after a few months. But the way it stands today and the way we can look at it is that gone are the days when the oil producing countries can sort of increase the prices at will and hold the rest of the world into ransom. Today you have other sources which have come up, the shale gas, the shale oil, that is a big balancing factor on any possible increase in oil prices. In fact, if you look at this year's budget speech of the finance minister, he has mentioned it that, answering those whole question of if the crude prices go up, then what do you do? Now the expectation is that if the crude prices go up, then there is every possibility, and we have seen it happening over the last few months, that the US shale gas, the shale crude will enter the market, which in turn will have a sobering impact on the increasing oil prices. So therefore, I think there is a check and balance which has developed. There is a kind of a structural correction which has taken place with regard to the crude prices, and I think that augurs well for an economy like India, which is a huge importer of oil, and our petrol prices, with given our sort of fertilizer subsidy and other subsidies, I think we are definitely, India has been lucky, but I think this is a kind of a structural shift which has been noticed by the government, and I think government has been able to capitalize on this structural shift. So the fiscal deficit targets have been maintained, and growth, or about which Aarati mentioned, growth is 7% plus. There are few economies today, there are very few economies which are today recording this kind of growth. And we recorded last year 16-17, 7.1. Year before that, I think it was about 8%. These are the revised corrected numbers based on the 11-12 base year. Then before that, it was about 7.5%. in 14 and 15. So therefore growth has been consistently 7% plus. A point has been made that the fourth quarter was perhaps affected by now demonetization. Now there is no concrete evidence to say so. In the third quarter, where demonetization was implemented during the third quarter of last year, that is from October to December, we found that the VAT collections in the states were very robust, and the VAT collections reflect the kind of selling that is taking place in the market, and there were counterpoints that sort of people had a lot of cash, so they were buying too many goods and other things, but you can't do it for 2 months, 3 months altogether. So the VAT collections were good. The central excise collections, which would reflect the kind of manufacturing activity that is taking place, that also remained fairly satisfactory, and the government was able to achieve its revenue target over the last fiscal. So therefore, if you look at revenue collections, definitely we cannot say that demonetization was the reason for some kind of a slow growth. Now, it could be one of the factors, one doesn't deny, because when the demonetization was announced, the government itself recognized and said that there will be a temporary impact on the economy, there will be some hardship, but that hardship would be short term. So therefore, the growth, so far as India is concerned, has remained 7.1 last year. This year, the expectation is that we should touch 7.5% at least. Now that GST has been implemented, in the initial 2 to 3 months it is possible, and it is very much likely, because you are making such a big change in the taxation policy and in the system. So there will be some initial bottlenecks and difficulties, which I am quite sure will get corrected in a period of about 2 to 3 months. And so therefore the true impact of GST should be seen for about 5 to 6 months or about 4 to 5 months in the current year. That, together with the expectation again of a good monsoon and a few other points which I will mention, I think India should see 7.5% this year. And going forward with GST coming in, I think we should say India touching 8% and perhaps closely moving to 9%. At this point, I would definitely say that in the next 2 years, I think next year we can expect reasonably, we can expect India to touch 8% growth. In fact, so far as the impact of GST is concerned, when it was launched on 30th midnight, and then in the subsequent 2 days, I found in the public discourse there were questions being raised whether it will really add to the GDP. And there were some thinkers and some experts who said that, it may not. And now nobody is saying that it will actually result in X% increase. Some thinkers, some economists, some research bodies have quantified it in the past. Government has not quantified it. Some research bodies and institutions have quantified and said that with the introduction of GST, the growth in GDP will go up by about 1 to 1.5%. Some people have even said 2%. Now, how much it will go up, the time will only tell. But the point is the GDP will certainly go up. We all know that in India there is a parallel economy whose size nobody is able to really quantify. In Finance Ministry, we also tried to, we engaged some 3 agencies and tried to find out what could be the estimate of the black money in our economy, and we found that even they found it very difficult to quantify, and their assumptions were so varied and the outcomes were so varied that it is really difficult. But we all know and we all agree that the size of the parallel economy in India is considerable. With demonetization followed by GST, lot of this activity today which goes unreported, lot of this economic activity which goes totally unaccounted for, that will get mainstreamed. And once that gets mainstreamed, the parallel economy will get eliminated, and there will be a shift of all these activities into the real economy, resulting in the actual increase in the growth of the real economy. The second point is that we expect a definite widening of the tax base, again thanks to demonetization and GST, widening of tax base. Growth in direct and indirect taxes are also going to be very strong, And with extra money in the hands of the government, there will be definitely a boost to public expenditure, government expenditure on infrastructure, on various other sectors, which in turn will contribute to growth. Now, there are so many other factors, but at this point of time, I would just like to touch these points. So, looking at the macroeconomic parameters, the GDP growth, we are 7.5%, we are 7%, hoping to reach 7.5% this year and perhaps 8% next year. The fiscal deficit is under control. The current account deficit last year was, 15-16 was 1.1, and 16-17 it's below 1%, it's actually 0.7%. Current account deficit also remains very robust. Reserves, forex reserves of $382 billion, that is the figure which I saw last. Inflation, which was in double digits a few years back. Consumer price inflation is also very much under control. May CPI inflation was about 2.2%, and consumer, it is expected that it will remain so at least for the next 6 months. And here I must mention that this has been possible. One reason, of course, is the low crude prices, but the other reason is, very targeted intervention on the part of the government. Take the example of pulses. Now, government found that the pulses prices were really shooting up a lot of, consumer prices, and were having a kind of a, having an impact, a spillover impact on other consumer prices. So 2 years ago, government started increasing the MSP, the minimum support price for pulses very aggressively. And as a result, we found a lot of farmers shifting to pulses cultivation, and there was excess production of pulses in the last 2 years. And as a result of which, the pulses prices have sobered down, and that has also contributed to control of the prices. Good monsoon was again, last year's good monsoon definitely contributed to the, to the food inflation being low. And the food inflation, as many of you know, the food prices contribute to, account for about 48% of the weightage in our consumer price in the CPI index calculations. So overall, if you see the fiscal parameters, the macroeconomic parameters of the government remain very robust. The second aspect I would like to point out is with regard to the accelerated pace of reforms. 1991, we all launched, as a country, India embarked on a path of economic reforms, and during that period, Dr. Rangarajan in the 90s played a very key role in the process of economic reforms, in the process of managing the Indian economy and pulling it out of the kind of crisis it had entered into. But then from 91 onwards, the pace of economic reforms has not been uniform. Sometimes it has slowed, sometimes it was fast, but nonetheless it has been unidirectional and it has progressed. There has never been a retreat. But if you look at the last 3 years, and I can say last 3 years because I was in the finance ministry, I was in a position where we played a very active role in policy making, and we were really fortunate to be in the government when such far-reaching developments were taking place. And the pace of economic reforms in the last 3 years have really gathered momentum. The government is committed to continue with this path of economic reforms, path of structural reforms, and the other policy initiatives. There is a total commitment in the government to continue with that. I will just list out, all of these reforms, but in fact, I must say that last year I was rather fortunate to take part in a ADB during the Asian Development Bank annual meeting last year in Frankfurt, and this year very recently in Yokohama in Japan. since it invariably coincides with the parliament session and the finance minister gets held up in the parliament. So there is a very prestigious sort of a panel discussion which takes place, and there are about 5 or 6 finance ministers who participate in that, including the finance minister of Japan, Indonesia, and some, some of the leading countries are represented there. So I was fortunate to represent India because the finance minister had accepted it and he could not obviously make it in the last moment. So last year and this year, in fact, when I was going on narrating the kind of reforms and the initiatives that have been taken, I mean, I found that most of the other countries were talking in terms of generalities, that given the world crisis, even the IMF also, when it presents its paper during the G20 meeting or any other, or during the annual meeting of the World Bank, IMF, they also talk in terms of, in very general terms, in terms of need for structural reforms, need for fiscal reforms, need for use of monetary policy instruments for sustaining global growth. But when it came to India, we were, we had a list of specific reforms which had been taken over, and this was something which was pointed out by the finance ministers of number of countries, that India has a list of specific reforms which India has undertaken. Now, if I can just list out, you see the budgets, if you see the budget speech of the finance minister over the last 2 or 3 years, it's a very focused budget. The architecture is very clear. The fiscal and economic architecture, the direction of the policy is very clear. In the speech, he lists out about 9 or 10 focus area. There is agriculture, there is skill development, there is investment, there is fiscal reform. So it is all specifically listed out, and then there are specific initiatives taken under each of these areas. In the budget also this year, I mean, I must mention that the kind of changes which have been brought about this year in the budget in terms of advancing the date to 1st of February, which is very, very important, because always we find in government the expenditures pick up only in the second half of the year, because the main budget gets passed sometime in end of May, and then June onwards you have the monsoon, and then by the time the expenditures really start, it's about April, it's about September or October. Now this poses 2 kinds of problems. One, the government has to borrow, to meet the gap, to meet the deficit. The government has to start borrowing right from the beginning of the year, because the second half is the festival season, the busy season of credit offtake. So therefore you don't want to crowd out the market in September, October onwards, when the, there are private sector borrowers in the market. So you are forced to borrow in the beginning of the year. So you hold a lot of idle resources, but you don't have, you're forced to borrow, but you're not able to spend. Of course, we do borrow a lot in the first half because your revenues also start flowing only in the second half. But expenditures also remain low. This year, by advancing the budget to 1st of February, the expenditures in April and May, I saw the latest figure, it is 55% higher than what it was last year. So the expenditure pattern of the government has become very even, and that's very important because the quality of expenditure will be maintained. This year-end hurry to sort of spend money and spend money in a manner where you sacrifice a lot of quality, that is today, that is a situation which hopefully we will not see again, because the expenditure will be evenly paced. Railway budget, for example, from 1924 it was a separate budget, and all that, if you remember, if we remember some of the railway budgets of the earlier years, everybody was looking for where a new train is announced, where a new platform is started, what is, the line extension, the all kinds of announcements which used to be made. And it was almost like for every constituency or for every state, there had to be an announcement. And if there was no announcement, then it became a big political issue in the parliament, and the headlines in the regional newspapers in the next day that so and so state has been ignored in the railway budget. So as a result, it was leading to a lot of announcements without the backup of adequate resources, and whatever resources railways had, these resources were thinly spread over large number of projects which went on for implementation for 20 years, for 25 years, and no money spent. Now, with the merger of the railway budget, that compulsion to announce, new railway, announce new trains, new railway stations, all that thing is gone, and it will have a more, the railways have today come to the center stage of government's fiscal policy. Highway sector, for example, if we see, the highway sector in the last 15 or 20 years has done an excellent progress, starting with the Golden Quadrilateral and the way the national highways and many states, I must say, have implemented excellent PPP projects, public-private partnership projects they have implemented, and the road sector has seen excellent development in our country, and this has happened without a separate road budget. So a separate railway budget was actually becoming a drag on a well-performing railways. So the expectation is that now that railway budget is merged, the compulsion of making announcements without the backup of resources, that will go. And similarly, the plan and non-plan expenditure, that classification has been done away with. Dr. Rangarajan had in fact chaired a committee, and that committee had also, sir, you would recall, you had recommended abolition of this plan and non-plan expenditure, and subsequently there were other committees also which recommended it, but somehow there was a big feeling that like we have lived with this idea of a plan. So if you do away with plan, then what would be the what kind of criticism you would face? But I'm very happy to point out that the government went ahead with this announcement. You see, abolition of the plan and non-plan classification, what it achieves is that expenditure allocation is made taking into account the importance of requirements. A construction of a school building would get money, but provision of furniture or repair of an old dilapidated school building will not get money, because that is non-plan, where a construction of a new school is plan. Sanction of teachers to a new school is plan, so therefore that was easier than sanctioning new teachers for old schools which were grossly understaffed. The same applies to hospitals also. Now you construct buildings, you don't maintain the buildings. A building which should have, been stable and good for, let's say, 25-30 years, it starts crumbling in about 7 to 8 years, and no money for its maintenance. So abolition of the plan and non-plan expenditure has done that. Now another big reform, which again, this is one area where the government has I think moved very fast, is with regard to the FDI liberalization. Now a point was made about investment sentiment being weak, especially the private investment sentiment being weak. So in this kind of a scenario where you have a lot of capital today floating around in the world, not just FPI, not just foreign portfolio investors, but more of foreign direct investors, there is a lot of money available. So we had to open up and we had to liberalize and facilitate the the FDI to come into India. And as a result, last year, India received more FDI than China, which is, I think, an amazing achievement, because China, as you know, has received tremendous amount of FDI over the last few years. Now that was possible because in 3 or 4 doses, the reforms, the FDI reforms government undertook, whatever required a government approval were put on the automatic route. And today, till the FIPB was abolished, more than 90% of the FDI was coming in the automatic route, and only 10% was requiring government approval. So, and what was coming to government for approval really did not, merit the kind of time that 5 secretaries had to spend sitting together in a body called the FIPB. So the time had come to abolish the FIPB and to delegate the powers to the concerned ministries. So FDI reform again has been another major change that we have experienced. Emphasis on ease of doing business, customs clearances, the tax reforms. I would like to talk a bit on tax reforms, and particularly the GST, and corporate tax, and on tax administration. Now, in direct taxation, if you see, the government has announced reduction of the corporate tax from 30% to 25%, so that our corporate taxes are somewhat competitive to the kind of tax rates which prevails in this part of the globe, so that we become competitive with countries like Vietnam, or with the Southeast Asia, with countries which are in our neighborhood. So that process has already started. In fact, in a modest scale, this year it has been reduced to 29% in respect of companies whose turnover is up to 50 crores, and it has been reduced to new investments in manufacturing sector to 25%. So a beginning has been made, and I am quite sure in the next 2 years it will be brought down further. Tax administration has been considerably simplified. Today, if you see income tax, even personal income tax today, if you see, the returns are filed online, the assessments are done online, and the refunds are also made online. Many of you would have got your tax refunds in the last 2 years in just about a month, in 2 months, without having to follow it up through your chartered accountant, or without having to follow it up in the income tax office. And it is all auto-generated, system driven. The instruction goes to the message, goes to the bank prepares the check, and the check is dispatched to you depending on the value, or if it's a low value refund, then it gets credited to your bank account. So that is the kind of change that we are experiencing in tax administration. Financial inclusion, GST, I will come to it a little later. Financial inclusion program, the Jan Dhan account, about nearly 28 crore bank accounts have been opened, and they have touched the Aadhaar law. The subsidy reforms, for example, the direct benefit transfer in LPG and kerosene. And one interesting thing which government did with regard to LPG was that to motivate and to incentivize the states, the government announced that whatever is the saving by way of resorting to direct benefit transfer in LPG, that savings will be shared with the state governments, so that the state governments also have a stake in seeing that this program is successful. With regard to fertilizer, on a pilot basis, DBT, direct benefit transfer, has also been introduced. With regard to inflation, there is now inflation targeting mandate given to the Reserve Bank of India as a result of the as a result of the amendment to the RBI Act, which was done last year. And there is a monetary policy committee which has been set up. And another big reform was the introduction of the bankruptcy law, the bankruptcy and insolvency code. That was a major regulatory gap which we had in our economy. Today, the resolution of a company, it's very easy to start a business. Many of you would know it's very easy to start a business. It's like a Chakravyuh. It's very easy to enter into it, but very difficult to exit. You can't just get out once you open a company. But the introduction of the bankruptcy and insolvency and the bankruptcy law, I think today facilitates quick resolution of corporates which are under stress. And then there is another bill which is ready, and you would have seen in the newspapers that it has been approved by the cabinet also. A similar dispensation for the financial firms, that is a similar dispensation in respect of resolution of banks, financial institutions, mutual funds, NBFCs which are under stress. That bill is expected to be introduced in the coming session of Parliament. Now, I would, before closing, I would touch upon 2 or 3 points which was raised, and I am sure they would be of great interest to you. Now, a point was made about demonetization. Now, whether demonetization was necessary, whether the government was adequately prepared for it, whether it was properly planned, how much money has come back, what it has achieved, all kinds of questions were raised, have been raised, and will continue to be raised. But I must mention here with all sincerity that this matter was under discussion even as a part of the previous year's budget. During the presentation of the 16-17 budget, sometime in January, February of 2016 also, this was under discussion. But then it was realized that you need more time for preparation, and you cannot just make an announcement. You need a lot of time for preparation. So therefore, no announcement was made in the budget, and it was subsequently put into a lot of deliberation. Now, first thing is whether it is required. Fake Indian currency notes, for example, the counterfeit currency notes. Somebody says that the counterfeit currency notes, after all, The reported figure of Caesar is just about 400 crores, and should you have for 400 crores, should you have demonetized it? Now 400 crore was what was caught. We don't know how much was in circulation and which was not caught. And there were clear evidence that the counterfeit currency was being used for terror funding. Now, to organize one terrorist incident, you may not require a lot of money. I mean, based on our discussion with the various agencies, etc., you may not require a lot of money to sort of do one act of terror. You may require few lakhs or few crores and all that. But the kind of damage it will do to the human lives, the number of lives that will be lost, the damage it would do to the property, the damage it does to the country's sovereignty, the damage it does to the peace and stability of the country, that is enormous. That cannot be quantified. So therefore, and there were clear evidence that these fake currencies, fake Indian currency notes, counterfeit currency notes were coming from across the border. So it had to be stopped. So therefore, while the designs were changed, it was necessary to sort of give a sudden blow to this kind of activity and tighten the entire flow of currency, fake Indian currency notes. There have been some reports in the recent days, I find in the television or in the newspapers, of some currency notes being pumped in through Bangladesh. That has been, they changed their routes. Initially it was across the border from the west, then it came through Nepal, then it has now got shifted to Bangladesh. But whatever fake Indian currency notes today has come into, from Bangladesh are nothing but photocopies. With the kind of advanced technology that we have with regard to doing color photocopying, it's very easy to do a photocopy, but the mere sight of it, the look of it will, you will know that it's a fake Indian currency note. So you have to deal with the fake Indian currency notes. Then we had this huge problem of black money in the economy. Now, some people say that, well, not all black money is held in terms of cash. Yes, I mean, a lot of black money may be held in terms of assets, either investments or as real estate or in various other forms of investments. But then there is still a lot of black money which is held in cash, and it's not relevant how much cash did not come back and how much cash came back. What is relevant and what is very critical is that the cash which does not come back and which did not come back, there the squeeze has been felt by the people who are not able to pump it back into the system. The bigger victory is where the money has come back into the system because the trail has been established. You see, currency note is an anonymous note. Nobody's name is written on a currency note. It does not belong to anybody. But when a currency note comes into somebody's bank account, then a name is attached to it. So now therefore, you know that so much money has come into these bank accounts. And to answer your question, the income tax department has done, I think I had also explained it during one of those press conferences, there is a lot of data mining which is now, a lot of system driven data mining which is now taking place. A number of private agencies and experts from outside have also been engaged to do the data mining and analysis, and as many as 18 lakh accounts have been identified which are highly suspicious, and there the notices have been issued and action is being followed. And very interestingly, the notices are not being physically served. These are online notices. The replies will come online, and then it will be taken up for disposal. So therefore, government is very careful to see that the whole thing is done in a very non-intrusive manner, because if you let loose the department to sort of go and ask people that this is the money you have, we want to cut down on the physical interface, because physical interface may lead to, other kinds of allegations and may lead to other kinds of harassment or allegations of harassment. Then it will be very difficult to sort of deal with the situation. So therefore, the entire thing is being done in a very non-intrusive manner. ABC analysis of the data has been done, highly suspicious, moderately suspicious, and not so suspicious. small accounts and the Aadhaar, the what you call the Jandhan accounts, also lot of money has come into large number of Jandhan accounts. And there also the investigation is going on to find out from whom from where the money came. In fact, during one of those meetings, the Prime Minister even went on to the extent of saying that, if somebody has used your account, your money, don't return it. I mean, he said it in some meeting, but I think it's very important, because I mean, you can say that it's kind of a transfer of money, a transfer of wealth has taken place. In Delhi, I can tell you, around Delhi, now during the period of demonetization, all these small and medium factories, they closed. The complaint was that, these are all cash dependent, small and medium enterprises. Some of them were, I am not denying it. So because they did not have cash, perhaps they felt some temporary stress. But what was happening was that they deployed all their, people, staff and workers and everybody, and we found the same people coming back into the, to exchange notes. Morning, the same people will be there. The video footage showed that the same people were in one bank, then they would go to another bank, then another bank. And it was very clear that these were the people, who were not coming with their own money. So very reluctantly, although we had discussed this election indelible ink, we had to take resort to the use of indelible ink. We had discussed about it earlier also during the planning process. But then it was felt that it will unnecessarily add to the workload of the bank staff and the staff of the bank, who in any case did an exemplary work by sitting till midnight in most of the places. So we didn't want to add to the work burden on the bank staff. Plus we did not want the system to become too intrusive. Somebody goes to exchange his own money and you put a ink. We didn't want to do it. But then we found that it became necessary. And the moment it was announced that indelible ink would be used, the queues fell by half. So lot of money has got mainstreamed. There's a name attached to every note which has come back into the banking system. The investigations are on, and I think if somebody has put a lot of money which he is not able to account for, definitely they will have to explain. And in fact, keeping that in mind, the IDS 1, the scheme was announced, the income disclosure scheme was announced. Another scheme was announced even during the month of November and December. The response was not good, but then an opportunity was given, and those who have not availed it, naturally they will have to face the consequences. But the sum and substance of the thing, what I am saying is that what is relevant is not how much money came back, how much money did not come back. What is relevant is that the money which came back, the money which did not come back, it gave a blow to the holders of that money. The money which came back under somebody else's account, in many situations it resulted in transfer of wealth. And today in Delhi, around Delhi for example, I can mention that there are a lot of migrant labor who came and whose accounts were used to put money in their accounts. These people have all gone. So the people who gave them money are now on the lookout where all they will go and search them in far off states and locate each and every person. They have gone. So that money, the transfer of wealth has taken place. And on a more substantive basis, the money which has come back, a name is attached to it, there is a trail, and it will definitely be taken to its logical conclusion. So therefore, demonetization, I think, has initiated a process of ending the menace of fake currency notes, and it has dealt a kind of a blow to the entire black money syndrome in our country in a manner that it will be very difficult for people to generate black money. I mean, nobody is saying that black money problem has ended completely. There is still black money and people will find ways and means of generating it again. But I think the whole initiative has given a solid blow, and close on the heels of demonetization, now that we have GST coming in, together GST and demonetization have dealt a kind of a blow to black money problem in our country, and we will not see the kind of black money which existed earlier. There will be still some black money. Nobody denies that, nobody says that it will get 100% eliminated. So demonetization has actually has initiated a process of cleansing of our economy. Now coming to GST with regard to the impact, the GDP impact I have already explained. Now the GST also will improve lot of efficiency in our business. I mean, many of you are investors, you are running companies, you will know better. Now it will improve the efficiency of Indian companies in terms of your logistics, in terms of cost of production, because of the availability of the input tax credit, because there will be no problem of tax on tax. If you have bought your raw materials in Karnataka and you are manufacturing something in Tamil Nadu, the tax you have paid in Karnataka to the VAT you paid in Karnataka, you will get the tax credit for that in Tamil Nadu. So therefore, it will have, definitely there will be no tax on tax, and as you know, it will reduce the cost of production, and it will bring in lot of efficiency in terms of logistics. The last I read, some 22 states had abolished the checkposts. Now obviously that adds to the efficiency and the speed of the movement of goods in our country. Estimates showed that as many as 48 hours on an average were spent by trucks waiting at various checkposts. Just the waiting time on an average was 48 hours. Now all that is gone. So therefore, the way Indian business operates, the kind of efficiency that Indian business requires, we are expecting, I think, a real game changer in the form of GST. And in a GST audit trail, it will be very difficult for any business, big or small, to keep a part of your business outside the GST network, because if you keep it outside, somewhere in the audit trail you will be caught, or I mean if you keep it outside GST, then you don't get the benefit of the input tax credit, so you become uncompetitive. So therefore, I think GST will add to a lot of efficiency and lot of efficiency in terms of logistics. GST, as I have said, will widen the tax net. Now, just to conclude with regard to the black money, I must mention that a number of steps have been taken. We negotiated with the Swiss government in October 2014, and they agreed to part with information in respect of the so-called stolen accounts, the stolen data of the HSBC bank accounts. Now earlier, the Swiss law did not permit them to share that kind of data. But then we confronted them with lot of data showing that there are many cases where we had independently done investigation, and we had found lot of dubious transactions. So if we have done some independent investigations and found certain suspicious, got some information which is prima facie suspicious, merely because some third party somewhere stole some data and announced it, how can you deny us that data? So when we confronted the Swiss authorities with that kind of an argument, they saw a lot of merit in our argument and agreed to part with those kind of information. And subsequently, as you know, the multilateral information exchange sharing agreements have been signed between the country, and now Switzerland government has also joined. Now government has also, as you know, renegotiated the India-Mauritius double taxation treaty, which was really the kind of which was alleged to have been used for sort of what you call the round tripping of lot of black money generated in India going abroad and again coming back, or lot of black money generated abroad being sort of routed through Mauritius. That also has been renegotiated, and I was very happy to find that Mauritius has kept our double taxation avoidance agreement outside their multilateral instrument agreement, which they have signed as a part of the OECD G20 initiative. Now so therefore, if we look at the overall situation, a lot of steps have been taken with regard to domestic black money, with regard to offshore black money. Now looking at the way forward, I have taken, I know, a much more time than probably estimated. I will just complete. Now what are the challenges ahead? Now the private investment today, there is a sort of statement that your private investments continue to be weak. Now, bank credit has gone down, no doubt, But I think lot of money is coming through the ECB route, through masala bond routes, that is through, you know, Indian rupee denominated bonds being floated by overseas, by Indian companies. The last statistics I had is about 40,000 crores worth masala bonds, that is rupee denominated bonds, to be floated in offshore markets. The RBI has given approval for 40,000 crores, of which nearly 23,000 crores have already come in. Then there is a lot of investments taking place through the PE funds, through alternate investment funds, through IPOs, initial public offer by various companies. So all that is happening. But yes, private investment has to be revived in a bigger way, and that is linked to the problem of fixing the problem of stressed assets in the banks, for which, as you know, the number of initiatives have been taken. I'm not going into that. Now, jobless growth, a point was made. Again, there is no statistics, frankly, of jobs being created or not being created. But then the whole question arises: if you are maintaining 7% growth, if you are maintaining 7.5% growth, how is it possible that no jobs are being created? So obviously some jobs are getting created. How much it is getting created, we don't have any robust statistics. The Niti Aayog has worked on a paper, and I think soon they will be coming out with with some initiatives with some measures for capturing that data. Now we have some challenges today with regard to the agriculture sector, especially with regard to the supply chain, supply chain arrangements relating to the agriculture sector. So agriculture sector requires perhaps more reforms, especially in the area of supply chain management. A point was made about government expenditure being the only driver of growth. But as I mentioned, a lot of investments are coming through PE funds, AIFs. Gopal will know better about it. A last point which was made was about the bureaucracy. Now, whether with all these online interface with the citizenry, with all these income tax refunds taking place online, or the online media being used, I can tell you, I mean, having been in the government till very recently, I can tell you that at least so far as Delhi is concerned, and I have seen it happening also in many states, in several states, I think the Indian bureaucracy is reinventing itself. That's a very good development which is happening. And if you see today in many states or in the central government, how the secretaries have taken to Twitter and to other forms of social media communication, I think it's quite amazing. It wasn't there a few years ago. During demonetization period, I myself, because all kinds of rumors were floating around in my office. Every time I would look up the screen, I would find a new rumor being floated somewhere that some 2,000 rupee notes are again going to be sort of demonetized. All kinds of rumors and false information or misinformation were sort of gathering pace. So it was very simple to use the social media, because you just make one tweet and within half a minute you find that it is flashed. That this is false, clarifies so and so. So not just with regard to communication, but with regard to the way the policy has to be implemented, the way positive changes have to be brought about, I think the Indian bureaucracy is reinventing itself, and I am quite sure that the bureaucracy will definitely not become irrelevant and definitely not become outdated. Numbers, yes, there needs for some kind of rebalancing within the bureaucracy. In some places you need more people, some places perhaps you can afford to have less people, so that kind of rebalancing will happen. But basically I think the Indian bureaucracy is is adapting to the new situation very fast, just as it did post 1991 reforms. Bureaucracy which was completely used to the license Raj and the issuance of license, etc., quickly sort of adapted itself. So I'm quite sure that will remain. So I think the government, the other kind of reforms there are a number of reforms which are on the anvil, and the effort of the government is basically to unleash all possible forces for maintaining growth, for sustaining growth, and for promoting inclusion, financial inclusion as well as other forms of inclusion. The changes are definitely disruptive, but disruptive changes are for the better in a positive sense. And I think if you put today the structural reforms which have taken place, the demonetization drive, the action on the black money front, the introduction of the GST, I think Indian economy is today undergoing a kind of a churning, and in the medium term, in about 2 to 3 years time, we will definitely see an Indian economy which is far more robust than what it is today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Das. There were a lot of insights actually in that speech, including how government expenditure is changing and is smoothing out over the year. And then what is happening in terms of further investigations on the bank deposits, and also the way the bureaucracy is actually reinventing itself. Thank you so much. Do you have some time for a question? Yeah. So,
If should it arise. So, but my question is, jokes apart, my question is, the farmers appear to be a very lucky lot. The first thing is, if there is a drought, there is a loan waiver. If there is good rains and it's plenty, they are not able to sell, there again a loan waiver. The third thing is they don't pay taxes. Then what happens with the money they have borrowed, etc., etc.? What is it that they are doing? Why so many suicides? Are they really suicides? What really is happening? And a further thing is, I'm very glad that you defended the demonetization, much to the chagrin of Mr. Birla, who was talking about investments not taking place on the private side, but I don't think that is correct. For my company, I have seen growth all over the place, even while demonetization was taking place, while GST is taking place, I have seen growth almost about 20-25% year on year. But the farmers thing is something which I am interested in.
No, I think the problem is really genuine and far more genuine. Now, you see, what happens is that for 2 years we had successive failure of monsoon. The real problem in India has been that even credit flow to the farming sector is somewhat uneven. It's very good in certain states with regard to, I'm talking about the crop loan. Is it audible? With regard to the crop loans, it's, the offtake is very good in certain states. In certain states, the farmers do not get it. Then, given the kind of land holding the land title system that we have, the kind of leasing and the lands being leased and subleased, the actual cultivator may not be the owner of the land. His tenancy would not be registered. So it becomes very difficult for such farmers to get to access the agricultural credit from the formal sector. So they go to the informal sector and borrow at very high rates. So therefore, while loan waiver, I am not going into that. Some state governments have announced it. It's for the state governments to sort of provide that money out of their budget. But there is still a lot of, the problem, the real stress also comes not from the farmers who have borrowed money from the banking system. The problem is faced by the farmers who have borrowed money from the informal, from some local money lender at exorbitant rates. Now that is the challenge which we have to deal with. How to see that, how to ensure that they get the credit, and how to ensure that he is able to sell his product and get a good price. That is why I briefly touched upon the supply chain arrangements to be made more robust. And other kinds of, so therefore, the farmers, the problems are far more complex, and in the last 2-3 years, we have tried to, address these issues in the budget to some extent, but lot more needs to be done, and I'm sure it is getting done. I'm aware that lot more measures are in the anvil and they will follow.
Transfer of wealth that happened because of the demonetization, though I wouldn't accept that would be the best way to do that. But my point is that was not the objective of the government. So why the objective got shifted? Because definitely what we heard at the beginning, these are probably corollary kind of things that happen. Is it because the objective was not totally met and the other things happened which probably were still good. That got spoken about much, and is that the reason?
No, the transfer of the wealth was never the objective of the government. It was an offshoot, and it should be seen more as a, in a lighter vein. And there is no statistics to show how much of transfer of wealth took place. It was, but it has happened in many instances, so that was certainly not the objective. The objective, as I explained, was to deal with the fake Indian, the counterfeit notes, and the problem of black money. I would feel that both the objectives have been achieved. Now, somewhere in the debate, this whole question came in. I don't know, from government we never said that so much money will not come back and therefore that much money. That was never said by anybody in authority from the government side. I don't know how it got into the narrative. The objectives, if you go through if you see the speech of the Prime Minister on 8th of November, and also following that, the Governor RBI and myself, we had a press conference, we gave out more details. We were only talking of fake Indian currency notes, black money and corruption. These were the three things which we were talking about. And on both the fronts, the data shows that we have got more or less what we wanted. The fake Indian currency notes, the counterfeiting those notes is going to be very, very difficult for the perpetrators of that crime. It will take them years to copy those features, the security features. And this is the first time that we have introduced some indigenously designed security features. Earlier, all the security features were imported. This time we have introduced some indigenously designed security features. And so that has been achieved. And the second, as I mentioned, is that the money which has come back into the system, it has definitely left a trail. Action is being pursued, and the impact is being already felt in the tax front also. I think I saw in today's newspapers, some of the business newspapers have today reported that the finance minister gave one figure, as you mentioned in the budget speech. Today's newspapers report that the advance tax payments have gone up, at the individual level, not the corporate advance tax, but the personal income tax advance payments have gone up, I think, by 40% compared to first quarter of last year. So obviously it is a fallout of, the demonetization, and people are now finding it difficult to sort of to suppress their money. And there is today no incentive to hold on to that cash. There's absolutely no incentive because where do you go and invest? The KYC norms are becoming so robust. If you go and buy shares somewhere, you are going to get caught. The shell companies, and action was initiated 2 years ago. Today, 1 lakh companies have, shell companies have been deregistered. And we undertook that as a kind of a project approach 2 years ago. And there is I can tell you that there is a lot of material the government has, this income tax department has got, and action is being followed. So overall, if you look at the objective of the government, the narrative has not changed. The narrative to eliminate, to give a body blow to black money, to fake Indian currency notes which are used for terror funding, I think, the policy has produced the right results.
A few days before, there is a reported news item saying that the balance in Swiss banks has gone down substantially. What does it indicate? Whether it has taken shelter elsewhere, other parts of the globe, or there is a real effective reduction in the whole black money holding?
No, very difficult to say. Very difficult to say really, but could be a mix of both. Could be a mix of both. But increasingly it is becoming difficult for people to park money in offshore havens, because one major positive fallout of this G20 initiative is that there is a and the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, that forum. One very positive outcome is that today there is growing realization and there is growing pressure from the developed countries on all such offshore jurisdictions which acted as the tax havens to sort of close down and to come tightly, to come down heavily on those kind of activities. So offshore tax havens are finding it difficult today, and In fact, I must mention that one of the countries, a small African country or small Caribbean country, I think, which basically sustains on gambling. In one international forum, I heard them saying that, look, you people are tightening, it's very good, but then our tourism industry is dependent on all this gambling and other activities. So what happens to us? But jokes apart, what I'm saying is that increasingly it is becoming difficult for such jurisdictions to survive. With KYC norms also, know your customer norms also being made more and more tight. In coming days, even the world community has realized that this menace has to stop because this is leading to terror funding.
Hariharan, my question is regarding this holy cow called defense budget, which is about 2%. It is very little discussion on the defense we see, and at least 50% is surrendered at the end of the year. This has been going on for a number of years. Don't you think systemic improvement is required? It is not a mere financial exercise, budgeting, and unless the ministry's system, their systems approach is improved, is there any effort to improve that? I don't know, doesn't concern finance ministry as such, but you are reflecting the figures.
No, but I'll tell you, when we prepare the budget, we never really look at what should be how much percentage should be allotted to, what percentage of GDP should go to the defense or what percentage of GDP should go to education. There are, optimum numbers which experts say that this is our requirement, but then you don't have resources to meet all the requirements. If you total up the requirement that health sector needs so much percentage of GDP, education needs so much percentage of GDP, defense needs so much percentage of GDP, if you put it all together, it's a very big amount, and government doesn't have that kind of resources. So when budget is prepared, you discuss with, detailed discussions are held with the defense ministry, and I'm specifically addressing with regard to defense. Detailed discussions are held with the defense ministry, and based on, whatever is their revenue expenditure, salary and other kind of things, that in any case pension, salary, etc., will have to be provided. Then there is this other thing relating to defense capital program, the defense capital acquisitions, acquisition of arms, ammunition, other things. That is discussed with defense ministry, and based on their order book position, how many orders they have placed, how many contracts they expect to be, deliveries to be taking place that year, monies are provided. So inter se priority is drawn up, and whatever is possible, defense money is provided. And I can tell you that defense sector in India has never really suffered because of absence of funds.
This is related to demonetization, sir, black money. So at the time it was stated there about 14 lakhs crores come into normal channel. Another 50 lakhs crores, about 50 lakhs crores have not come into the normal channel. That is a government account or bank account. If it is the case, now the Supreme Court has directed, giving direction to the government and the Reserve Bank of India also, that within another 15 days, we may expect a proposal from the government giving extension of time for the demonetization, the black money coming into the normal channel. Another question is that, even in those countries, advanced countries, GST has been introduced. Now they are finding it very difficult. What rectification measures are, after learning a lesson from the, are we learning a lesson, or after learning a lesson that we are going to rectifying the measures in GST? Are we on the right line?
Now with regard to demonetization, what will happen in the Supreme Court, I cannot comment. The Supreme Court has made some observations. It's for the government to respond, and government will respond. So I can't, obviously I would not like to comment on that. Now with regard to the money, the cash in circulation was 17.44 lakh crores. That is the cash in circulation, of which about 15.4 lakh crores were 1000 rupee notes and 500 rupee notes. There's a process of counting of notes which is now going on. The Reserve Bank is doing it. Why the counting became necessary was that about a fortnight, about 3 weeks or so into the demonetization, we found that a lot of double counting was taking place. Because the cash is first deposited in the branch, from the branch of the bank it moves to their zonal office, from zonal office to the currency chest and to the nearest Reserve Bank, the regional office or whichever is the nearest Reserve Bank office. Now we found at several points there was a double counting and overlapping numbers were coming. And we did a test check in a few states. And we found that, there was some double counting taking place, and it was all done in discussion between the Finance Ministry and the Reserve Bank of India. So together we discussed, and it was therefore decided that it's better that the Reserve Bank of India does a proper physical verification of the actual notes received. Now the notes will have to be counted through counting machines. Obviously the counting capacity of the Reserve Bank of India in terms of the number of machines they have, the machines are in existence for the business as usual situation. In a particular year, they receive a certain number of old notes which are counted and which are destroyed. Now here, in a matter of 2 months, you received much more number of notes. And you don't have the required counting machines to count that within a matter of just 2 or 3 months. So that's why it is taking time. Let the Reserve Bank of India complete that process. We will know what is the final outcome. Now with regard to GST preparedness, I can confidently say that initially there will be some problems reported here and there, but I think in the first 1 week we haven't heard any major crisis anywhere. It has gone through so far so good. But the preparation this time has been very, very robust. The GST Council, led by the Union Finance Minister and the State Finance Ministers, and not only the ministers, but also the backup, the various groups and subgroup of officers of the central government, of Revenue Department, of Central Board of Excise and Customs, of the state VAT departments. Now there has been tremendous amount, there are almost 25 or 30 subgroups of officers were constituted. So the preparation that has been gone in is very, very robust, and we are quite, quite optimistic and quite confident that it will, the implementation will be sort of overall quite smooth. We need not have any concern about that. There were some apprehensions expressed about price rise. I think many of us, I was outside the government, but I did make a statement, perhaps it was reported in some section of the media. The Finance Minister himself has also clarified this on a number of occasions. We don't expect the kind of price rise. You see, initially the input tax credit, it will take about 2-3 months for the manufacturers, for the wholesalers and for the others to really understand the true impact of the input tax credit. But going forward in 3 months' time, I think it will stabilize, and the apprehension of any price increase I would feel it is quite misplaced.
Good evening. The general belief on post-demonetization is that the 70% of the so-called unaccounted black money is in the political system. But if you see the post-demonetization, if you see the body language of the politicians across the country, especially in the state, doesn't seem to, in fact, the recent events which has been happening in the last few months in the state, doesn't indicate anywhere there is a death of cash post-demonetization. So, how do you sort of justify this?
I will reply to that separately to you.
As honest citizens, welcome the demonetization move and all the government moves. But actually, the black money is being generated at the when the government spends on, like in the public projects and all that, and there it comes out and it goes to the politicians' hands and all that. And is there any monitoring system would come in? That is, income part, government is very clear, all the systems will take care. The outflow of the money, again it is going to come as black money. Will there be any system in future in India for monitoring such outflows?
You see, the system of government procurement, the system of payment to, the system of doing due diligence with regard to the various works estimates of, the contract estimates, and the system of payment to the contractors. Money, there is leakage which happens at these three stages. One is at the stage of procurement. Now the tendering systems will have to be made more and more tight, will have to be made more and more transparent. So far as Government of India is concerned, now there is a, the Ministry of Commerce has now launched a portal whereby all government procurement will be done through that portal. So that brings in lot of transparency to the tenders of various departments. You know who's bidding, what is the price. The estimates are also there, and you must have, there is lot of steps being taken by government, and I must mention that some state governments have also taken, very sort of important steps to see that the estimates are not, are not inflated. And then the third stage is the payment to the contractors. There again, online system of payment of contractors, third party monitoring of works progress, the so-called old the check measurement systems, all that, a lot of it needs to be done at the state government level. And I think we are slowly moving in that direction. There are some very good case studies in many districts of various states. So it's a process. I agree, overnight this cannot be corrected. It's a process. And with regard to political funding, which you mentioned, the electoral bonds have been announced in the last budget by the finance minister. And I also saw in the newspaper 2 days ago, the finance minister has mentioned that the next target of the government is to clean up the political funding. The electoral bonds, of course, of the former CEC is here. He will have his views, and the present CEC has also given his views. But I would explain the rationale behind the government decision to announce these electoral bonds. Now, the criticism against electoral bonds is that it does not have transparency. You will not know who's giving money to whom. But in our country, the real problem starts from there. The interaction with large number of high net worth individuals, corporate houses, who give money to political parties and who would like to make check payments, they have the difficulty in the sense that they say that, look, if I give more money to one party and less money to another party, I am antagonizing him. And I don't want to antagonize any political party. They want to play safe with all political parties. So they would like to make check payments. At the same time, they would not like to get into the politics of it, of antagonizing any political party. So some amount of anonymity is necessary. But at the same time, the money has to be white. So what electoral bond does is that the payments will have to be made by check. When you buy the electoral bond from a bank, or you have to make a check payment, and you buy the bonds, the bond will not carry your name. So it is obviously white money which is being taken out, which is being used for giving political donation. It is white money, it is not black money, at least that is number one. Number two, when the bond is given to, electoral bond is given to, and a very short window will be provided for encashing that electoral bond, otherwise it has the danger of becoming a parallel currency in our country. So therefore, a very short window of time will be given within which they have to encash. So it protects the identity of the donor. So he is free to give whatever he wants to any political party. It protects his anonymity. You ensure that his white money is only given. Now, if you don't do that, supposing in the interest of anonymity, you don't, in the interest of, you say that, no, we should not allow, then what happens? Then the corporate houses will be under compulsion to generate cash. Now, how do they generate cash? Again, some bogus bills, some over invoicing, and other kinds of methods will be out. So therefore, taking all this into consideration, a decision has been taken. An announcement has been made that the electoral bonds will be launched. But again, I think the latest position I would not be able to say, because the Chief Election Commissioner has made some observations. Now government, but I have explained the rationale behind government announcement of these electoral bonds, and it is a very well thought out announcement.
Mukesh,
So I think we've absolutely. If any of us we're feeling a little low with the uncertainties that might have been generated by the economic reforms and especially GST. I think, like the good doctor, Mr. Das has come in and reassured us that the economy will be in fighting shape within the next 2-3 months. Thank you, Mr. Das, for such an illuminating presentation. I think the clarity that you brought into play is something that we'll all go back with, and you answered all the questions fairly patiently. Given the experience that you have with the raucous Delhi media, these were perhaps pretty tame questions, and probably a walk in the park for you. Nonetheless, we appreciate your coming all the way from Delhi and speaking to us. Let me also thank Aarati for asking right at the start all the sharp questions, but in the most polite way. A couple of announcements regarding our upcoming events. July 21st, we have Mr. Rakesh Sashibhushan, who is the Managing Director of Antrix, the commercial arm of ISRO, and Mr. Rahul Narayan, the Managing Director of Team Indus, the startup in the space program. They will be talking about the incredibly exciting odyssey that we are seeing in our space program, and I think it's something that you should mark in your calendar. But crowning it all is on August 1st, we're going to have Mr. Shiv Nadar, the founder of HCL, who will be talking not just about his company but something beyond business. So I expect that to be a real good program. I think I should not forget to thank the Madras School of Economics. Dr. Rangarajan is here, and for continuing to host us in this lovely auditorium. I'm sure you built this auditorium with our requirements in mind, so thank you very much. Finally, thank you all for coming this evening, and